I'm Mike Esneault, and welcome to the Arts Council of Greater Baton Rouge's AC23 Artist Legacy Series podcast. This is a series where we talk to artists who are doing amazing things in the areas of the arts, including performance, education, production, as well as arts advocacy. We record this series in the Virginia and John Nolan Black Box Studio, as well as in the Jan and Bill Grimes recording studio here at the Carrie Rouge Community Arts Center. Be sure to visit artsbr.org for more information on all the great things we are doing here at the Arts Council of Greater Baton Rouge. Hope you enjoyed the podcast series, and thanks for tuning in. Yes, indeed. Bravo, Peter Harris. Man, thank you for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to welcome our viewers and listeners to another episode of AC23 Plus Artist Legacy Series, brought to you by the Arts Council of Greater Baton Rouge. And today I have the distinct pleasure of having an old friend and someone who I always enjoy hearing and playing music with, Mr. Peter Harris. Who came up from New Orleans, or say came over.
Came over.
Came west.
Yeah. Oh, came up in New Orleans, and from what? I drove from New Orleans.
Okay. Well, glad you made it.
Yeah. Me too.
Well, so that tune was an old standard. Really, to me, one of the Herbie's most beautiful standards, Dolphin Dance, which you put a little twist on the beginning and the end, and which I dig.
Yeah.
So, my goal today is to kind of talk about all things Peter Harris and let our listeners and viewers know, all the things that you've been up to. And, the series is an artist legacy series, so I'm always curious about how things evolved. Like the people, I already know this, but I'm going to have you talk about, some of the legendary New Orleans figures especially that you had the benefit of being mentored by. Mm-hmm. And that's, both you and I understand that that's hugely important for keeping it going, passing it on.
Yeah.
So let me start there. So, are you originally from New Orleans?
Yes.
And so what were the formative years like? How did you get into music?
Well, the first thing I could say about that is my mother liked old free pianos. And so we had a few of them
already.
Yeah. So we had a few of them in the house. I'm one of 7 kids, so a lot of kids in the house. I'm 6th of 7, so I have some older brothers. Yeah. So that was definitely a significant thing in my mind. Whenever people ask me about how do I get my kids into music, usually I tell them make sure there's an instrument around, or plural, singular, whatever. In addition to that, I have fond memories of, we always listened to WWOZ, so I knew, I was aware of Ernie Cato, his show. I was aware of the Meters, Rebirth Brass Band, Dirty Dozen, Dr. John, Lee Dorsey. Yeah. So that's for me, that was part of my form, the seeds. Mm-hmm. And my parents also had a good friend of theirs. There's a couple that would come over once every couple of months. And after they tied a few on, more than a few, their friend was I was so young, so he sounded great to me. In retrospect, I don't know how good he actually was. Right. He was good enough to carry tunes, play tunes, and carry tunes.
And it had an impression.
It made a distinct impression, because they always had the greatest time, and we had the greatest time whenever they'd start. And it was always songs from the New Orleans book, and so that was also some of the seeds that were planted for me. And then one of my older brothers, my oldest brother played piano, and in high school, and at some point he started playing wind instruments. He played saxophone and flute. And then I have another older brother that started playing drums, and that had an influence on me because his friends would come over and they'd have these jam sessions. Right. So it's I was around it.
But you're not playing yet. You're just
I wasn't playing yet. I was just around it.
Right.
And, at some point, I started getting this feeling that I really want to play. I want to be able to do that. So at that point, actually, I was kind of, how old was I? By the time I really decided, I really want to play an instrument. Oh, and by the way, I took piano lessons. Not for a long time, but probably for a couple of years.
So that was your first instrument?
That was my first instrument. I knew all the notes on the keyboard. I played a couple of recitals or whatever. That probably lasted for a couple of years, but at the time I was a swimmer. I was more into swimming, and I was like, so that took priority. But it wasn't until I was like 16 that I got an electric bass.
What drew you to the bass? Why bass?
Because I had a brother that already played piano. I had a brother that already played drums. My little brother already played guitar. So it's kind of problem. It's like I definitely wasn't choosing an instrument that they already played.
Right.
Or there was going to be problems.
Right.
So it was kind of process of elimination. I mean, I can't necessarily say it was like, I heard the bass and, I mean, I did know what the bass was, and I knew what it sounded like. I liked the way it sounded. Right. I was definitely listening to bands that I knew who the bass players were. I think by then I was into like Led Zeppelin, Red Hot Chili Peppers, I don't know, whatever high school kids are into.
Right.
Things like that. But
where'd you go to high school?
I went to Jesuit High School.
Okay. So how was their band program? Was that important?
So for me, it wasn't at all because I wasn't in the band program. Like I didn't study formally until I got to UNO.
Gotcha.
Years later. But I had so when I started playing bass, my first bass teacher was Jim Markway. I don't know if you know Jim.
Yeah, I remember Jim. Yeah.
And Jim was a great teacher, still is. And so also in conjunction with that, I was like before I even had the bass, there was a kid down the street that played guitar, and his mom, both his parents were in the LPO. I don't know if it was called the LPO at the time,
right?
But they were in the orchestra. So he came from a musical family, and he played guitar and sang. And like when he just heard that I was getting a bass, I was already in his band. So the whole thing about
that was the audition.
You know the joke about like the kid getting
learn one string on the bass.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, that's actually not true. Like because you actually get gigs before you learn. I hadn't learned any of the strings yet, and already had gigs.
And you've been gigging ever since.
Yes, I've been gigging ever since. So, but at that time, I joined his band, which was just like cover band. But we learned a lot of tunes. I mean, we probably learned 50, 60 songs just on our own. And at the same time, I was studying with Jim Markway. And with Jim, I just I didn't bring those songs to him. I just learned those on my own. And I just let Jim go, like, just point me whatever direction he wanted to, which I'm glad I did because that direction was reading music, reading chord changes, learning how to walk over chord changes.
Right.
He gave me, like, some of the first, he introduced me to Jaco Pastorius. He introduced me to Charles Mingus. I'm trying to think through the recordings he gave me. Some Miles Davis records, Chuck Rainey, Percy Heath.
Right.
So he was giving me he was giving me recordings, transcriptions of those bass players, and then one of my older brothers actually one of the first jazz records that I listened to in its entirety was Miles Davis Workin'.
Oh yeah.
And it was on cassette tape, and I remember my brother had I can see his handwriting right now, Miles Davis Workin'.
So that I'm trying to remember. Is that Paul Chambers?
Yeah, Paul Chambers. So I was playing electric bass for the first 4 years of my bass playing career. So I didn't get an upright until I was 20. But I had gotten to a point where I was like most of the music I was listening was upright players. But anyway, to back up a little bit, I was in this band in high school. We learned a bunch of tunes, which was a great way to learn. I'm just going to learn these from the records. And for about 2 years, I mean, we were playing every weekend. We were playing Sweet 16s, homecomings, backyard parties. Yeah. Even though I was in high school, I was playing fraternity parties. I was coming up to Baton Rouge, playing fraternity parties. And,
plenty of that.
And learning that I didn't want to join a fraternity.
Good instincts.
I got
no offense to fraternity members.
Yeah. I got to watch them get hazed, all that fun stuff.
Right.
So that was like, and then when I finished high school, that band ended, and me and the drummer started. This was the way we used to do it. We like put up flyers all over Tulane's campus, looking for people to join a band with us, and we started this funk band where it was like it ended up being 8 of us, and we would have like these epic, like every Saturday was like a 6 or 7 hour session of like writing tunes together, which was very rewarding, and we did pretty well. We had gigs at Tipitina's, Maple Leaf, all the local places, and we started to travel a little bit, but that's a bunch of young kids.
And remind me, you're still in high school, or are you in?
This
college?
is like first and second year of college.
Okay.
So also while that's going on, I'm still listening to jazz records.
Mm-hmm. But have you played any jazz gigs, so to speak? At that
No,
point?
but when I still hadn't I didn't get an upright until I was 20. So from ages 18 to 20, I'm playing electric bass. I'm in this funk band. I'm still studying with Jim Markway. And I was enrolled at UNO, but like I knew I wanted to major in music, but I was like, I had never studied formally, so I was kind of intimidated by it. Mm-hmm. And when I bought an upright, Jim just immediately referred me to Bill Huntington. So that was kind of So that's when I started to really, that was like a deep dive into that well. And then I went auditioned for UNO. I didn't get in the first time, but a friend of mine, Matt Johnson, who I was in that first band with, and he had a coffee shop gig, Plantation Coffee House on Canal Boulevard. Mm-hmm. I used to play with him, playing electric, and then I got the upright, and he was the one that was like, "You should go audition at UNO. You should come to UNO." So auditioned once, I didn't get in. I kind of got my stuff together, went back. And that's around the time I started studying with Bill.
And was Bill, because I know Bill taught at Loyola for years. Was
he was teaching at UNO.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I eventually got into UNO, and I'm just my perspective. Like I don't think I realized what I was setting my feet into. That like I'm going to study with Ellis Marsalis. You know what I mean? Like I didn't. I checked out, my friends had given me a couple of Winton's records, and I knew like who the Marsalises were, but like it was kind of mind blowing to when it started all kind of dawning on me, like whoa, this is heavy.
Yeah.
So eventually, so that I was still in that funk band that lasted for like the first 2 years, year and a half that I was in the music program at UNO, and then that dissolved, and then I was like all in playing jazz, and just strictly from the standpoint of the instrument, the upright bass is a beast, and it's like once you and learning the style of music is, it's like to do it and do it right, as you know, it like really takes some period of time where you just like deep dive
deep in the shed.
Yeah, exactly. So that was me, when I was like 20 until now.
Now I'm curious, because you said you studied with Bill Huntington, and one thing about Bill because when I was, I guess, coming out of high school, I'd been studying with Mike Polera for quite a bit, and he would throw me on these gigs that he had at the Windsor Court, which would be basically Bill Huntington and Johnny V.
Right.
So that was kind of my first entree into playing trio music in New Orleans.
Right.
It's totally above my head.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I would do those gigs, and the first thing I noticed about Bill, who was so gracious about the situation, was his sound. He's got this beautiful tone, and that's one thing I've always thought about your playing. Like, you just have this beautiful sound on the bass. So I'm curious, like, did you get a lot of that from him? Did y'all talk about those things?
We didn't talk about those things, but I was certainly trying to emulate him.
Yeah.
I could probably say that right now, but like especially like those for a good 4 years, it was impossible not to. You know, it's like, A, he's my teacher. B, I was going to check out Ellis's group on a regular basis. C, when Bill couldn't make the gig, a lot of times they would call me to sub. So talk about being in over your head. Man.
And
I
so
mean,
did you, like, was it, I mean, I kind of know the answer to this, I think, but, I mean, was it a lot of learning the tune on this bandstand?
It was. It definitely was. It was also, like, whenever I'd get called to play Ellis's gig, I would just, like, I would go through every record.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because with Ellis, like, he's not going to tell you, he's not going to call you and be like, hey, let's
Practice.
be ready for this. It's like none of that. It's like, be ready for anything. And so I was able to, I don't know how to say this. It's like, the words are escaping me, but just through going all his records, I had some degree of safety, armor.
Right.
Maybe that's the type of, I mean, it's
There's
like,
a
it's
safety net
literally
there.
like,
Yeah.
So, but there was always like, with Ellis, there was always like, you know, 60% of the tunes, like, you kind of knew he might play. It was like either his tunes or tunes that you know he played a lot. And then there was like another 20%, you know, or 30% that was like you knew that he played, but you haven't heard him play it in a long time, and you've never played with him, but like, there it is. Here we are playing. And then there was like 10% where it's like you had no idea. Like, in some cases, like you never even heard the tune before, like, and he's just playing. It's like,
Well, so would that have been Jason on drums?
usually, yeah, Jason on drums sometimes. Although, you know, Jason's always been so busy with other stuff like Marcus Roberts Trio or whatever else.
For our listeners, we're talking about Jason Marcellus.
Yeah. So it could have been, I'm trying to think of who else. Like, sometimes it might have been O.C. Davis. It might have been, I remember doing one with Jeff Clapp.
Yeah.
I remember a couple times Herlin Riley showing up, and it was like, I mean, talk about intimidating. Like, playing trio with Ellis and Herlin was like,
Right.
It's like, what am I doing here?
Well, I asked about Jason because and I never think I don't think I ever saw this, but I would just hear about it. Maybe Roland Guerin would tell me this, but when you have Jason in the group, because he knew all that music.
Yeah.
So he would be over there calling out changes to bass players.
Yes. Yes. It would be, yeah. If when I really needed him, he'd be calling out changes. Or sometimes it'd be like Ellis would start a standard, and like, you were familiar with the standard, but you weren't sure what key was in. So, you know, Jason has perfect pitch. So,
Right.
And that's the other thing. When Ellis would play a standard, sometimes it'd be like, oh, cool, I know this. And you go to play the first note, and you're like, he's not in the key I know this in. And then you're fumbling around. The tune's already like, you're already 4 bars in.
Right.
Like, you know.
Yeah, that's funny.
So, but as it relates to, I mean, talk about the ultimate learning experience. And just thinking about the fact that he was willing to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, on his gig.
Well, that's the ultimate teaching experience.
Yeah. But there's 60 people, paid tickets. And he's like most interested in like teaching you,
Right.
you know, or just whatever. Like, this is the way it is.
Uh-huh.
You sink or swim.
Well, that's that old school. I experienced that with Alvin Batiste quite a bit, where we would practice constantly.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, just the two of us, just shedding, and then might have a Snug Harbor gig coming up, because he would traditionally play like during Jazz Fest. He'd do something, and you get on the gig and like, all that stuff you practiced, those tunes, maybe played 15% of them.
Right.
And the whole time I'm going, what is this? You know,
Right.
and it's sink or swim. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
But he really, though, I think those legends and that way of teaching, which is such an oral tradition, they teach you how to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Like all your ears are 100% radar.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
You can't learn that in a book.
Yeah. And that to me is the most important skill for musician. I mean, any type of musician, really. But I mean, that's like when I'm on a bandstand with anybody. The first thing I'm gauging is like, is everybody listening?
Right.
And once you get one, if you get one person in the band that's not listening, it just like, it can just like really not. It can. I mean, it usually does. It just throws everything.
Right.
It turns it from playing a gig to working the gig. Like,
Sure.
Changes from play to work really quick.
Yeah, the parallel, and I'm sure you've done it too as a teacher, and we can talk more about teaching in a minute, but the parallel I would always use with my students was it's exactly the same thing as a conversation. And you're in that group of people having a conversation, and you know instantly, like, who's engaged or who's just waiting for the space to inject what they have on their mind, and they're not listening.
Yeah.
You know, and musically it's, especially for maybe the students that are watching or listening, you're going to experience that.
Yeah.
You know, there's certainly different levels of listening, and that is a real skill set. I mean, to be able to play at whatever your level is, and at the same time be fully engaged.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, in the defense of like any of younger players or novices, it's like you're so consumed with like, how do I play the instrument? How do I play these changes? This is like, how do I play
so
this
much
lick I
mental
learned?
stuff going on already.
And it's like, and it's like to get beyond that and be
Right.
like, wait, I'm just gonna listen. It's like it takes, for me, I mean, for most people, it takes a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
There's a blessed few who like kind of instinctually understand that, you know. Or I mean, it also takes a lot of like confidence and humility, like at the same time, to like
you're right.
to like be able to like, I know I practice all this stuff, but I'm just gonna like let go of that and just see what happens right now.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always tough when you're playing with somebody who's, I feel this way, who you feel like when they get on the bandstand, they have an agenda of some kind.
Yes.
And it just, for me, it just kills it.
Yeah. Same.
You know?
Same.
So, well, we're talking about, playing music, so let's play another tune.
Sure.
And you brought in a tune, an original tune, called 3. And it's a waltz, so is that the reason for the name, because it's in 3, or?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if there was any deeper meaning or...
Yeah, it's one of those things. I couldn't think of anything, and then so I called it 3, and I thought it was going to be temporary, but then it made it onto the record as 3.
So... Yeah, Peter, beautiful tune, man.
Thank you, man.
I'm realizing when I introduced you at the top of this, I failed to mention some things that I should have mentioned before, so I'm going to do it now. For our listening viewers, obviously Peter is a wonderful bassist, and now he's a composer. You've done arranging over the years. You've been an educator for how many years?
A couple of decades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're still doing it, huh?
Yes.
And you're a band leader.
Yes.
And honestly, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the program is I just think it's amazing and wonderful and a service to New Orleans culture, to the musicians, to the community. What you have going on at the Pontchartrain Hotel, acutely, the Bayou Bar. So, and tell me about that. Like, I kind of know some of this. I've had the pleasure of playing that job with you. But how did that evolve? And one of the things I'll add to that is I think what's so special about it is you really have a true rotating roster of the best musicians in New Orleans who play, let's say, jazz music. How did that come about?
So that came about, one of my good friends, Brian Landry, is a chef, and he owns a food and beverage company called QED. And he's been active in New Orleans for, since the early 2000s. And I think after Katrina, we were young then, but he was tasked with operating galatoires in New Orleans and in Baton Rouge, just to give you an example of his pedigree. He was around 2016, 2015. At the time, he was working for John Besh, and John Besh at the time did the food and beverage at the Pontchartrain Hotel. Some things happened with John Besh, which you may or may not know about, and so they were looking for new food and beverage operators. So Brian and his partner Emery Whalen submitted a bid, and they got the contract. So that was like 2016, and I went and visited, and I was always loved the space and everything, but I'm not a pushy person, so I was never trying to solicit a gig or anything. Something that I was aware of, but it's like, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
Was there any music happening there at all?
So the first thing that happened was, first of all, the Pontchartrain Hotel. I'm interested in learning more about this, but it has a long history of musicians and celebrities, staying there, playing there. I don't know if you know who Toots Washington is.
Oh, yeah, the pianist, yeah.
But he used to play there. I think I've been told that Cole Porter used to stay there when he would come to New Orleans. So anyway, I don't know when they stopped having music, but when my friend Brian, QED, took over, they gave the solo piano gig to the last person that had been playing there. And that was short-lived. And then also, I think they had a band there on Thursdays. I think they were trying some things on the Hot 10. So yeah, they were doing some things around. So I think he got that contract in 2016. It wasn't until around 2018 that he asked me if I'd be interested. And one thing that I knew about that venue was that they had a piano. However, the piano I knew was awful, in awful shape. Probably hadn't been tuned in decades, right. Had not been taken care of at all. So basically my response to him was, I would love to, but we need to have a decent piano. So fast forward about a year. It took him about a year to get this because, as you know, it's not easy to procure a nice piano. So about a year later, we didn't talk at all about it from that time, but he suddenly called me about a year later and was like, hey, we got the piano. Do you want to start doing. So he gave me Wednesday nights. So I started doing it. That was spring of 2019, and he also gave me Thursdays, but I kind of I elected to not like. I elected to try to book gigs, you know, like play Wednesdays and then book other groups on Thursdays. And that, you know, we were off to a good start. There's the piano there, but there was no drums, there was no bass amp, there's no PA, there's no lights, just a piano. It looked like you were about to ask me something.
Well, I was going to ask, so that Wednesday night, was it just a duo format?
We were doing trio.
Trio, okay.
Yeah. And it, you know, it was going pretty well. I mean, it was like, it was a type of thing, you know, it was like, it was new, so it wasn't like anybody really knew anything about it, you know. But to Brian, I don't know if I mentioned Brian's partner, Emery Whalen, but to their credit, they pay a lot of attention to, like, they're not always paying attention to, like, the bottom line, like, did we make more money than usual? They may or may not have, but they pay attention to, like, did it feel good for this group to be in here? Was like the energy good, and they really liked what they were hearing and what they were feeling and the way it made people feel. The people, it wasn't a lot of people coming in at the time, but the few people that did were responsive. They were into it. Some of them were coming back.
Yeah.
So then, so that was spring of 2019, and we were about to hit our anniversary, 1 year anniversary, when COVID struck. Yeah. Everything got shut down. And then it was about another year before it was legal to, like, have any music anywhere. So when that happened, he said, hey, why don't you, like, when we start, like, why don't you just, I don't know if he told me I could. He's always been pretty lenient with me. Another thing to his credit is he lets the musician be the musician. Yep. So he's not one of these owners. They are not the type of owners that are telling you, like, I want this, I want that.
Micromanaging everything.
Yeah, definitely not micromanaging. Just letting me be me, which is great. So when we came back after COVID, I decided with his approval that, like, for starters, I'm just going to play both nights. And at that time, there was, like, so much from the musicians and audience members. There was so much pent up need for music that when we came back, it was like it was cathartic, you know. And so I think that it was kind of like it was a spark, you know, that started the whole thing. I do believe it would have gotten there to that point anyway, you know, like it would have evolved to what it is now, I think anyway. But at the time, it was like, you know, it was an electric feeling. It was like everybody was so excited, and musicians were excited, the people were excited, you know. So it went really well. And after like 5 or 6 months of that, they offered me Tuesdays and Fridays.
So now 4 nights a week.
Yeah. So that's what it is now. And I was about to say something, but do you have any questions?
Well, I was just going to say, from the time it turned, especially to 4 nights, one thing I just noticed on social media, you know, you're always kind of showing the calendar and who's playing and such and such. But one of the things I've always admired about the way you're approaching it and programming it is you're getting a real variety of rotation. The level's always super high, but I guess the easy thing would be to just have the house band, like the same people,
right?
Maybe, but that's not what it is. So you know, I always find it fun just to see, like, oh, okay, well, you know, that'd be a great band. That's a great band. That's a great band. Yeah. Or just combinations of people that I know. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I'd love to hear that mix.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
So it's almost like a lab to you in a way. Huh?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like it makes it more work for me, but it's completely worth it.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I don't know if that might like speak a little bit to like the perspective of a bass player might be a little bit different because we're, you know, going back to that joke about, you know, bass players playing all these gigs. It's like we play a lot of gigs. We play in a lot of formats. So we like, you know, and we're not like usually featured on anything, which is okay, but we're always observing and paying attention on what's working, what's not, what's making the gig a drag, what's making it not a drag.
Right.
You know, and it kind of goes back to that thing where things we're talking about with musicians who listen. You know, like the top of my list is always like people who are going to show up and want to be there and love playing music and love listening, and it can go anywhere.
Right.
You know, but it has evolved. The other thing that I think might make my approach a little different in especially like in the jazz context, I think the whole concept of bands has been a little bit lost in the jazz context, like the importance of bands, like so much of like the jazz industry, for lack of a better word, it's about like, you know, I'm going to see Herbie Hancock, I'm going to see Stephon Harris, I'm going to see which is great, deservedly so, but like, can you imagine going to see the Miles Davis Quintet? Right. You know what I mean? Like, it was not just about Miles. Like, it's like, I want to hear like the way they play together. It's like, you know what I mean? Or like, I want to go hear this group because of the way, you know what I mean? And it's like, to me, that's always a lot more powerful than like, I'm generalizing here, than being blown away by like one person's playing, you know? So, but even from a marketing standpoint, like, I've chosen to like name all the bands because I mean, I knew going into this that like seeing all, like if you were to look at a calendar and see 4 nights a week, the Peter Harris Quartet, it'd be like, that's, even if the bands sound great, just visually, it's like, it's not intriguing at all. It's like, you know, and I think the jazz genre like is misconstrued a lot, or it's sometimes misrepresented. I feel like what people think, even for me, what I think sometimes when I see the word jazz, or you like, it's like, it's not what it is at all, remotely. I mean, not when it's done right. Because when it's done right, that's when people are like, oh, I didn't know, I had no idea that I would like this. You know, it's like, well, people instinctually know when the musicians are listening and communicating, and that translates.
Yeah.
You know?
And one thing I do like about that space, you know, there are other venues where it might be, and these are valuable venues as well, one where you're, you know, it's sit down, let's listen, you know, almost concert style, which is great in itself. But I just love the, as you mentioned, the energy level, and it's almost, it has elements of that joint thing about it, you know, or the juke joint type of thing, where it's just everybody's engaged, and it's there's an energy level, and you're not that far from the band, which I like. You know, so you could really feel the energy of the band. Yeah,
I've always thought of it as like a combination of like Snug Harbor, Donna's, the Ritz-Carlton, you know, like just Ritz-Carlton from the perspective that it's a hotel. There's guests there. They're coming in, you know. Just Donna's because it's like community, that's neighborhood vibe. And then Snug Harbor because it's a listening room also. It's like all those things in one. You know, so... And I think it also speaks to, I think the most important aspect of it is highlighting what New Orleans music has to offer, which is that, like, even though we're playing serious music and we're serious about it, it's still a social music. Like, Pete, you can go there and it serves a social function, and you're listening, and
it's art.
Yes.
It's true art.
Yeah. And it's like, to me, I feel like that's that's the roots of the music, not just of New Orleans music, but just like American music, any type of American music, but American jazz music, and I feel like for the most part that's getting lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, kudos to you for doing that. And you actually, what was it? You got the Jazz Journalist Award, 2024 Jazz Hero Award for this work that you're doing, which actually showed up in Downbeat. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well deserved. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, Peter, I appreciate you being here. It's always great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And anything coming up that you want to mention? Obviously, you have the Bayou Bar series. Anything else like you're excited about or involved in?
Yeah, Bayou Bar 4 nights a week. So I'm doing I don't know if you or your listeners are aware of, in New Orleans there's something that started during the pandemic. Everybody was doing the porch concerts, and one of them is still going. It's called the Laurel Street. Yeah. I forget if they call it's a Laurel Street series. I don't know if they call it the porch series or music series or what, but they have a website and everything. But some of the organizers of that series go to the Bayou Bar a lot, and they've noticed, this is actually a great setup for this next tune.
Yeah.
They have taken notice that probably the composer that we play, whose music we play the most, is James Black's.
Yeah.
And so they've taken notice that, and to me, James Black is like the Beatles of New Orleans composition, where it's like I haven't heard anything that I'm
right.
like oh, this isn't. It's like everything's compelling. So anyway, the organizers of the Laurel Street series took notice of that, and so they asked me to do a tribute to James Black. That's this Saturday, 4:30 to 6, and before my group plays, the New Orleans Nightcrawlers are going to be playing. I think they play like 2:30 to 4, so they're great. And then in my band, it's going to be myself, Jason Marcellus, David Torkanowski, Ricardo Pascal, and vocalist Christian Bold.
Oh, yeah.
And so
great band.
Particularly happy to have David Torkanowski and Jason Marcellus on it, as their two direct links to James Black.
Right.
People that knew him, were in the rooms with him,
right.
on the stages with him.
Right.
That's
awesome, man.
Yep.
Well, so this James Black tune that we're going to play is called In the Keyhole.
Yes.
You turned me on to this tune, so I appreciate
Nice.
that. I'm going to let you start it.
Okay, cool.
Arts Council of Greater Baton Rouge would like to acknowledge our generous sponsors, the Shell Corporation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, and the City of Baton Rouge.